Behind every bit of mom wisdom is a story of a real mom and real kids just trying to love each other well. Whether you're cozied up on the couch with a mug of coffee or out for a walk, you're welcome to join us as we share stories and laugh, learn, and grow together. It's the I'm On Podcast. Welcome to the I'm On Podcast. I'm Abby with Chloe and Susan and Megan, and today we are putting our fists up. We're going to talk about fighting, and today's episode is called Should You Argue in Front of Your Kids? The story is mine. It's a quick one. I grew up, my parents fought a lot in front of us. My parents have been married since 1974. So whatever that puts them at 48 years. I don't do math. So they've been married for a really long time now, and a very happy marriage, but they fought in front of us a lot. And it was, from my memory, what I can recall, it was usually about money. I always remember the fights being about money. And so one time I was probably, I'm going to say I was 11 or 12 maybe. I took money out of my I didn't have a piggy bank. I had a little box, and I put it in my dad's nightstand drawer with a note that said, take this money, use this money to take mom. I don't know if I said take mom out to dinner or to buy mom something nice to make up and so that everything's okay. Yeah.
That is the purest thing ever.
Well, and so he came to me later and gave it back to me. He's like, kid, I don't need your money. Your mom and I are fine. And you can take your money back. But I think in my mind, I was like, they're fighting about money. Aww. If I give them money, then they can make up and everything will be okay. What did my dad feel when he saw that? How did it weigh on him? I'm sure he said something to my mom about it. How did it make him feel to know that his fighting, their fighting was impacting me to the point that I wanted to do what I could to smooth things over? And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Whether we know it or not, maybe our kids aren't going to come to us and give us money to fix the problem. The way that we interact with our spouse and when we fight with our husbands in front of our kids, it does impact them. So first question, before we talk about whether or not we should do it, did you guys grow up with parents fighting in front of you? Megan, do you want to go first?
Yes, because your parents is sitting right here.
Well, and I feel like both my parents have strong personalities. And so, which I loved and I still love about them today. They're both very much, go-getters. They're if someone asked me which of your parents wears the pants in the family, I'd be like, both of them. That's the problem. I'm just kidding. Not the problem. So yes, they definitely did. However, there was always some sort of resolution. And I think one thing that they did really well was if they did fight in front of us, they would always ask for forgiveness in front of us as well. So that we, realize that, okay, people are going to have disagreements and arguments, but they work it out. And then they, ask for forgiveness if there was something on their side that they felt like they need forgiveness for. So I do remember, though, being a little kid and hearing them, getting a couple bad arguments and being really nervous, because I'm also a very conflict avoidant person. So it did make my little child spirit nervous when they would fight.
Yeah. What about you, Chloe?
My parents fought in front of us, but they were always like, hey, mom and dad aren't going to get divorced. We're forever. So they would remind us of that a lot. I actually remember when a couple of my friends' parents were going through a divorce, my parents talking to us about that and how that wasn't something that they were going to do. And I guess it never made me nervous when they fought. I'm not someone who typically shies away from conflict either, though. So
yeah. And Susan, your parents were divorced, right?
Mm-hmm. They got divorced when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
So what's your experience like?
Yeah, so my parents, it's so interesting. My dad got mad. My mom never really fought back. Mm-hmm. My mom was super chill, so she always kept it together. My dad clearly was mad. But there were a lot of conversations behind closed doors, but I never heard my mom raise her voice.
Yeah.
So were you shocked when they got divorced?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
That's interesting, though. We'll get to that for sure, because I think that's something worth discussing. So I have some statistics here. There's a 2-year study of a little over 400 families, and research showed that unresolved tensions between parents were linked to increased anxiety, depression, and social phobia. So that's unresolved. But another study showed that middle school students whose parents resolved their conflicts had better coping skills. Another one showed that parents who had constructive conflicts, those kids ended up showing better social skills, had better cooperation, showed greater empathy. So really what they're finding is if you fight in front of your kids in an unhealthy way and you do not resolve things in front of your kids, yes, it can lead to depression, anxiety, things like that. But otherwise, it's not a bad thing to fight in front of kids. And I feel like arguing in front of your children is kind of one of these things that today a lot of people talk about as like a good thing. Yes, you should do it. Yes, you should do it. But kind of what I just said and what you hinted at earlier, Susan, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So just off the top of your heads, though, how do you guys feel about it? In general, would you say that overall you think it's a good thing? Or like, what's your gut reaction?
I'd say yes, but I think you have to have rules. And, of course, you want your kids to work things out amongst themselves too, but there have to be rules. We don't call names. Yeah. We don't hit. We don't threaten. So as long as there's rules and you're clearly arguing with the intention of finding a resolution about something, and then the kids see the resolution, and then see if they say any angry words or tone. If the tone's angry, you apologize. Then this is relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the rules. I was reading from a clinical psychologist. Her name is Dr. Lori Watley. She gives these 2 tips. One of them is that the parents still have to be a united front, and what that kind of means in this case is that even if you're fighting, your children still need to see that you love each other and that you're a married couple. So that means there shouldn't be interrupting. There shouldn't be name calling. There shouldn't be passive aggressive behavior. And then the other rule is that you don't fight about the kids in front of the kids, because that can pile on the anxiety for them and the pressure for them. Like
it pulls them into it.
I'm the one that's causing mom and dad to fight.
It's me. I'm the problem. It's me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if it's on Mark's website. We'll have to look, but we do have a post, How to Fight Fair. Is that on Mark's?
I'm sorry, it might be on all 3 sites, honestly, and I'll link to it in the notes.
And also, I do feel like a big, just a revealing of how strong a relationship is not, is there absence of conflict, but it's how do we navigate conflict and how do we get through it? Because through conflict, you can build a stronger relationship. My deepest friendships, my relationship with Trent, they're fortified by the way we've moved through conflict and grown stronger through it.
Yeah. Megan, do you and Hampton fight in front of the kids?
So our kids are little. They're 3 and 4 months. So yes, we do, but we are definitely becoming more aware of how we do it and when we do it and what we're arguing about, because when they're little, they can't really understand. They don't really know. But as our 3-year-old has gotten older, he can tell by our tone. He can tell more by what we're saying. And so we're just having to be very conscious of that going forward, because I do want him to see us have disagreements and work through them so that he learns that conflict is okay. But I'm just becoming very aware of what we do talk about in front of him because of that.
Well, some of the stuff I was reading also said that when it comes to arguing in front of babies and toddlers, the words are not a trigger. They don't understand. It is the tone. It is the facial expression, the volume, and those can cause stress responses. And like toddlers, you can watch how they speak to others when they're angry to know how your fighting style is affecting them. So keep an eye out, Megan, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and when he was younger, like I want to say like a year ago, even when he was like maybe 1.5 or 2, if we were fighting and our tone got louder or we got louder, he would start kind of just yelling too. And then we would stop and we'd be like, okay, sorry. Like, I'm stressing you out.
I've had my kids say, stop fighting. Why are you guys fighting? Like to me and my husband. And we're like, it's funny because sometimes we're not fighting. We're just having a heated discussion. And we're like, we're not fighting. We're, everything's fine. Yeah. But I don't think.
I'm just like, Bud, I'm a very strong Italian background. You got to get used to a loud voice. It's just always going to be there.
Yeah. I love it. Well, and another thing I was reading said, pay attention to your child's reaction while you're fighting. And I'm like, I don't know any adult that is in like a real legit heated fight that is able to then focus, change their attention, their focus over to their kids and go, how is she handling this? Does she look anxious? Is she crying? I mean, I guess if it's like right in your face, you could tell, but I think that we lose our control too much when we fight to know if we're doing it right in front of the kids.
Well, and that might be a kind of litmus test for the fight's gone too far. I feel like if you have lost control, then you probably have gone too far and need to say, Mark and I used to have a code with each other. And if we felt like one of us was getting a little bit too passionate about it, we'd look at each other and go, do you need a glass of water? Can I get you a glass of water? And that was like our cool it kind of thing. Like we need to take this offline. Good. We need to wrap this one up and resolve it on our own. One of my kids used to melt away. And I remember that. He just didn't like it, and he would just kind of evaporate.
Well, yeah, doesn't it depend on the child? Like, I mean, disappear. Some kids are more sensitive to seeing their parents fight and would react more quickly and easily, where others are kind of like, we know everything is fine.
He would just leave, and I'd have to go find him.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I brought this question up over lunch yesterday in the office and asked a bunch of people, what they thought. And one person said, I don't like it. I grew up with my parents fighting. My brother and I would sit in the other room and listen to them. And I remember one time going, all right, on 3, we're going to shout, stop fighting. And they did that. And I think I kind of recalled doing that too. Like my sister and I, like if we team up and we tell them not to fight anymore, then they'll have to stop. And like my parents, like I said, are married, happily married. That was just part of life for us, and but I can't say it never made me worry about them, like that there would be divorce.
And I would say if that is what your kids are doing, then you need to show the self-control to be able to stop. Because that's what we want. When we tell our kids to stop fighting, we want them to have enough self-control to stop. So we have to realize, whoa, we got out of control. You're right. Thank you for telling me. That was really good that you told mommy and daddy to stop fighting. Because you're right. We need to stop. We need to resolve this in a better way.
Oh.
What do you think most kids assume that fighting leads to divorce? Like, do you think most kids, like when they see their parents fight, are like, uh-oh, does this mean, do you need to have that conversation with them?
I mean, the conversation my parents had with me when my friends' parents, I had a little bit of a season where a couple of my friends' parents were getting divorced. It really meant a lot to me. Because I think that is natural for a kid to see, oh, my parents are fighting. What if they don't want to be with each other anymore?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and what is it? Like 70% of arguments are recurring. They're over the same thing. So whatever your thing is in your marriage, that thing often comes up over and over again. So like, I think that is one thing that impacted me. It's like it's always about money. So is that ever going to get resolved? No. So does this mean that it's going to be the end of their marriage? I think that that's something else that weighs on kids.
Well, and one thing I would say too, sorry, Susan, I feel bad because my parents are sitting here, but I guess it wouldn't matter even if they're listening.
Exactly.
I remember one time, you guys got into it and I think you just had to leave. Like you just had to take a break and go out of the house. And I was terrified. I was like, is she never coming back? Like, is she not going to come back? And I remember you saying like, no matter what, I will always come back. Sometimes I just need a break and I need to like be by myself for a minute. I was just laughing because I remember like, I don't know if it was like a year ago or 2 years ago, like I did the same thing and my kids weren't old enough to understand, but I was like, I just have to get out of here for
well, if you'll remember too,
in my car.
I finally had to go tell you guys, look, if I always go to the Bayshore. This is where I park at the park. I'm not going anywhere. I just need to get my Bible and go sit in the car and find some peace and creation without people yelling at me.
That is true. So, it's like, how does that translate to a child? Like
it does. Yeah.
I haven't thought about that.
So I told them where I always
That's
went.
Good.
This is where I go. When mommy needs a break, this is where she goes.
So another one of the guys at lunch said, what happens when you argue and hopefully you're not name calling, but you might be saying something like, you always criticize me for this, or you have no self-control, or, things that you're saying, which that is kind of name calling. And then your child thinks that they can repeat what you've said because, well, you know mommy better than I do, or you know daddy better than I do. So obviously if you said it, it must be true. Like, how do you then... Is it enough to just go, you know what, we're adults and we're allowed to say those things to each other? Or is that wrong too?
I think you got to model the do-over. Mark is a wordsmith, my husband, and so he kept a tight rein on this. There was only certain things we could say, and he policed it. So we did this thing called the do-over. Even if in our arguing, if we said something wrong, we were to look at each other and go, do you want to do a do-over?
Oh, that's
in
good.
other words, take a breath.
Is it the person that's just
So
been
like
offended?
if I said something bad to him, like you always do this, blah 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 blah, he would say in front of the kids, or even if we're alone, would do this. Do you want to say that sounded really harsh to me? Do you want to do over? And then you got to stop and think, okay, how did I say that? What was my tone? All right, let me start over. Honey,
Would that make you even more mad? Like, if someone's like, do you want to try that again? I'd be like, no, I don't.
I do, and I would like to add one other word in front of it.
But for somebody like me, it didn't make me mad because I tend to. I'm a slow ramp up, but when I blow, I blow, and I can just vent.
Yeah.
And my tone is too passionate and it's too harsh, and I may. I'll never call names or anything, but I could be harsh, like.
Yeah.
And bring up things, you know how in a fight you bring up things from the past that you shouldn't. Let those go.
Or
Keep
you
it on the
use
subject.
always and never. And
Yeah.
all those.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's just equally important that if you are an arguing family, that your kids see an abundance of affection too, to counteract that. And that'll help take that kind of divorce fear out.
I think that's true. I think that balance is a key point. If all your kids see, maybe because you're so busy and you're doing your thing, he's doing his thing, and you're just kind of like moving through life around each other, and all the interaction that they see between you is fighting, that's going to be a problem. Mom and dad only fight, and when they're not fighting, they're just not together.
Yeah.
I think that can be scary.
We forget that kids' first language is observation. It's not speech. And so sometimes it's not our words, it's the way we treat each other, it's the way we act. And so they're going to sense, even if you don't argue in front of your kids, they're going to sense when you're not getting along.
Yeah, I think that's true. So then do you have the argument? I mean, if you can't avoid it, you can't fake it, you can't convince them everything is okay, but you can't get away. Do you just say, all right, we need to have this out, and do your best to do it in a productive way?
I guess the problem is we're adults, so we should be able to control, like, take a break. Okay, we're going to make an appointment and talk about this when the kids go to school tomorrow. I'm going to go into work late or something. Or, later that night, after we put the kids to bed, we're going to finish it. And then in the morning when they wake up, we're going to have breakfast together, and we're going to tell them, hey, we resolved this last night, and give them a smoochy kiss and gross them out. I mean, do the opposite.
Yeah,
that is one other thing that I read a lot about, that they either need to see you resolve it, or you need to tell them you resolved it. Because maybe you did have to walk away and take a 20-minute break, and they went to bed. They might not realize that everything got fixed.
And here's where our heart has to be right in it. Because if you tell them you resolved it and they still sense that you're bitter about it, they will sense it. They have, kids just have this like radar on their parents.
The other day, James, we were in a little tiffed about something, and I remember it's something silly probably. And James, we were sitting at the breakfast table, and he goes, why is everybody being so quiet?
They know. He's three. He's three.
That's so funny.
See, I kind of struggle with not being able to set aside my personal feelings. So, for instance, we went out to breakfast last weekend after church. It was just one of the boys and my husband. The other one went home from church with a friend, and something set my husband into a bad mood. And during breakfast, he hardly said 3 words. And then we had to run an errand afterwards. And as we were getting out of the car, and my older son was sitting right in the back seat, I looked at him, I go, did I do something? Because I feel like something happened and it turned your mood, and you hardly talked to us during breakfast. And so we kind of had that conversation, and he didn't respond well, because obviously I was accusing him right there, like putting him on the spot. But I couldn't let another hour go by with some weird mood going on. And I'm like, should I have waited?
Why didn't you text him?
Yeah,
I do that to my husband
right there.
too. Yes, I
That's
do.
not a
I'm
bad
sorry.
idea. No.
I do. I text.
Does he text you back?
Oh, I text Mark in meetings if he's being too stern at Family First. I'll text him. I go, bring it down.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't do text confrontation with Trent.
No, it's not confrontation, but like in this case, in front of their kids,
Yeah.
if you're not sure and you don't want to embarrass him in front of the kids,
Yeah.
You can send a text like, do we need to talk? Are you mad at me?
okay,
or did
okay.
something happen that is inappropriate for the children? We're not going to talk about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, you just touched on an important thing, is in the argument still being respectful to my husband in front of the kids. And not that I say things that are disrespectful, but when you're fighting, it's just hard to not say things that the kids can interpret as being a dig or whatever, where two adults might understand what it really means, but the kids don't get it. And what I was going to say earlier, Susan, when you talked about like ways to fight fair, using like I feel statements instead of you are. So instead of talking about you, and what they're doing wrong, turning it around to talk about how it's affecting you instead. I think that that's a good thing to model in front of the kids.
good.
So then let's fast forward to how fighting in front of your kids impacts their future relationships and how you perceive conflict in marriage. Because, what I was mentioning about our friend who didn't want to hear her parents fight and they got a divorce. I think that now she's carrying that with her. She's like, I'm not going to fight in front of my kids. Look at what, look, it hurt me. It hurt, I think it hurt my future relationships. But they say that to see your parents fight and resolve it well will lead to good conflict resolution for you.
Yeah, I think my parents, one of my favorite things they modeled for us was they always made it a point. We only talk about, like, I only talk about mom, I only talk about dad positively. I'm never going to talk bad about your dad to you. And they did that very, very well. My mom never complained about my dad to us and vice versa. And Trent and I actually had that in our marriage vows that we were going to talk to each other and talk about each other positively. And actually we have a friend in the office who's asked me, I've never heard you complain about Trent. And I'm like, yeah, that's the thing we do. I learned that from my parents. And that's something we try to do really well. In our friend group, actually, we're in a married group at our church. And that's kind of like an agreement amongst us is, hey, if you bring a marriage problem to us, like I'm always going to push you towards your spouse.
So how do you balance that? This is kind of going in a little separate direction, but how do you balance that with like letting your friends, like being a friend to somebody who is struggling in their marriage or whatever? Where's the line there?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I've had a lot of different instances happen with my friends, and I think there are some things I do feel called to encourage my friends on in their marriage, and there are some things I just have to say, I'm praying for you. That's really tough, and just let it go between them and God and their spouse.
Yeah. See, like I said, I grew up watching my parents fight, not all the time. It wasn't like they fought all the time. And they, like I said, they had a healthy marriage. I keep on feeling like they're going to listen to this and they're totally not going to listen to this. They're in their late 70s or mid 70s. But I still became very conflict avoidant. And my ex-husband and I never fought, never, ever fought. And so... And our kids were so young when we divorced, so I don't think that they would even be able to tell you what life was like. But for them, the truth was they could say, our parents never fought. So I think that that's also modeling something to them, like not fighting is not the sign of a healthy marriage.
Yes.
But not fighting or fighting, whichever one you do, that is not the issue. I think the issue is what is underlying all that. If you don't fight, is it because you don't feel heard, you don't feel respected, you don't feel, or whatever the reason is that people don't fight? I think that those are the real issues at hand. The fight is just the outward sign of what's happening underneath the surface. So,
yeah, I think it's in my parents' case. Like I said, I never really saw my mom fight back, but I wasn't surprised about their divorce because, like I said, you just know. Like I knew for sure that their marriage was not going well. And so what then happened to me is I became a little bit hypervigilant. Like, looking for it, reading between the lines, when doors were closed and discussions were going on, wondering. And that breeds insecurity too. And like I said, I feel like maybe some kids more than others have this intuition, but I think kids kind of know when things are going well and when they're not. And if you hide everything from your kids, they're going to start writing the story and making things up. And it's almost better to invite them in a little bit to the struggle because then they're not surprised or worried or thinking of something else. So I don't know where I was going with that, but really there's two sides. If there is something wrong, don't hide it from your kids. You cannot hide things in a family, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think it's important for them to see, for you to see them fight productively so that then when you're married as an adult, you kind of have something to reference. Because I think it is really tough if you never see your parents fight at all. Then you as an adult, when you're married, are like, do I just hold it all in and not say anything and, just let it bother me eternally or just sweep it under the rug? Or, I feel like you just don't know how to handle it then.
Right. Well, and I think everything that we've talked about so far, every little pointer, it just takes being very, very intentional throughout it, whether it's by saying your little code word for we need to take a break or purposely, resolving in front of them or going back to them and saying we resolved it. It takes a lot of intention. And if you're in the middle of a fight, that often goes out the window because you're in fight or flight kind of response. And so it takes a very meaningful and thoughtful person to be able to do that.
I think too, something that, because we've been married longer than everyone else here, we've learned to balance is there's always one person who's a little bit more passionate. Usually like it's one person who at first, and then the burden is going to be on the other person to keep it cool in front of the kids and not escalate. And that's the hard thing is the escalation. So kind of always being in their mind thinking, okay, this is his issue, so I'm going to have to keep it level here and be the one that brings it down and keeps it together for a later time or whatever those rules are that you have. It takes practice. It's hard. It's hard, but it is worth it because again, you're modeling for the next generation and we want to get better at this in every generation, not worse.
Right.
So my mom has always said that I think it was their 7th or 8th year married was just the hardest year. Like they just fought every day and all of.
Oh my gosh! Don't tell me that.
Sorry. It might not be that for you, but she describes
I'm about
it.
To be there.
I know. I'm sorry. But my brothers and I, we were really young, and she said they just fought every day. So, what encouragement could we give to a mom who's listening to this podcast who maybe is in that season where her and her spouse are just not getting along and dealing with the stress of motherhood on top of that?
I would say this, every little tool we mentioned today is not new to Mark and I. We learned from counseling. We went, like Megan said, we were both very strong-willed people. We went to counseling. Now, if you can't afford counseling, that's why we have iMom and Alba Dad. We have so much content on there. And Mark's blog about fighting fair and the things that, great people have learned and taught us. And so little tricks help so much. Like code words or whatever you need.
Yeah. I've tried, what we're trying to do right now, I'm trying to verbalize my appreciation for my husband more often. Like we will, I walked in yesterday and he was washing my coffee cup that I'd taken to work. And I just said, thank you for washing that. And he's like, yeah, no problem. It almost surprises us when the other person says it because it's no big deal. But we just try to verbalize appreciation a little bit more.
It's good.
And then giving the benefit of the doubt and remembering
that's a great one.
He's not trying to offend me. He's not out to get me. We are on the same team. I think that sometimes when we're uncomfortable, when we're unhappy with something or when we're tired, we turn that other person into a villain when they're not. I know I'm not. I wouldn't want him to do that to me. So I think that it's only fair that we give them the benefit of the doubt.
I think another one is remembering that marriage isn't 50-50. And so there are going to be seasons where you have to give more. Maybe he's going through a tough time at work or something, or maybe you are, and he has to give more. And so knowing that there may be months or years where you feel like you're always being the equalizer. And then there may be years when he has to, and that's life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pressure.
Yeah.
Another good thing, as we wrap up, I wanted to mention that I read this, that if you fight in front of your kids, it's really helpful to check in with them afterwards, even if they saw you make up. And especially for little kids, make sure you do some kind of physical gesture to show you've made up instead of just words, because they don't fully understand the words. But like, give the hug, give the really overdone kiss, but also check in with them. And you can say, how did that make you feel? And if they say it made me scared, you don't have to say, you don't need to be scared. You can say, I understand that made you scared, and I'm sorry that made you scared, but that was probably a lot of big feelings for you just then. And I'm really sorry that we put you in that position. Make sure you say, we both love you. We both love each other. And this is kind of just what happens in marriage, and kind of like what your parents said to you. But to not avoid the conversation with your kids, I think is also really important. Do you fight in front of your kids? And if you do, do you have any special code words? Do you have any ways to make sure that you're not taking it too far? Tell us about it in the link in the show notes. That's where we'll also put some links to some articles that we talked about fighting fair. And if you like stuff like that, good content on iMom, subscribe to our iMom Minute. And thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the iMom podcast. iMom is the motherhood program of the nonprofit organization Family First. Along with our fatherhood program, All Pro Dad, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the iMom Minute, by going to imom.com/subscribe and get tons of great ideas, insight, and inspiration. The iMom podcast is hosted by me, Abby Watts, along with Susan Merrill, Megan Tigner, and Chloe Blumenthal.